How can one role change the course of an actor's entire life? For Marlon Brando, the answer was written across a handful of characters that didn't just define his career, they redefined the very art of acting. Before Brando, Hollywood acting often meant polished lines and perfect poses. After Brando, it meant raw truth, broken voices, and emotions that felt too real to be scripted. By the time he turned 70, Brando had lived through triumphs, scandals, and exile from the very industry he once ruled. But the story of his life could always be traced back to four roles that altered everything. Stanley Kowalski in A Streetcar Named Desire, Terry Malloy in On the Waterfront, Vito Corleone in The Godfather, and Paul in Last Tango in Paris. Each role was a turning point, launching him to stardom, winning him redemption, or dragging him into controversy. This is not just the story of a great actor. This is the story of how four roles forever changed the man who played them, and how, in the process, Marlon Brando changed cinema itself. Marlon Brando was born on the 3rd of April, 1924, in Omaha, Nebraska, into a turbulent household. His mother, Dorothy, had a flair for drama but was consumed by alcoholism, while his father, Marlon Sr., was stern and emotionally distant. Young Brando struggled in school, restless and rebellious, drifting without direction. Acting was never part of the plan, it was the escape he stumbled into. In the early 1942nd, Brando moved to New York and enrolled in classes at the Actors Studio, where he studied under Stella Adler. There, he encountered the method, a radical style of acting that required performers to draw from their deepest emotions, to live inside their roles rather than simply play them. Brando absorbed it completely, and with it, he discovered his voice. When he stepped onto the Broadway stage in Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar Named Desire in 1947, audiences were stunned. This wasn't acting as they knew it, this was electricity. Critics hailed him as a force of nature, a performer who brought a dangerous, almost animalistic energy to the stage. Hollywood soon came calling, and within a decade, Brando went from a troubled youth to the most influential actor of his generation. Yet Brando's career was not a straight climb. He rose, fell, and rose again, with each turning point marked by the roles he chose. Some resurrected him, others nearly destroyed him. But together, they tell the story of how an Omaha boy became the most talked-about actor the world had ever seen. When Marlon Brando brought Stanley Kowalski to the screen in A Streetcar Named Desire, Hollywood changed forever. Adapted from Tennessee Williams' acclaimed play, the film captured Brando at just 27 years old. Raw, magnetic, and dangerous, Stanley wasn't a polished leading man. He was violent, animalistic, sensual, and unpredictable. Brando didn't just perform him, he inhabited him. Audiences were shocked, critics were divided, and yet everyone agreed cinema had never seen anything like it. Before Brando, movie stars spoke their lines with practiced elegance. Brando mumbled, shouted, sneered, and slouched across the screen like a man who had wandered in from the streets of New Orleans. His performance pulsed with realism, so much so that many viewers felt unsettled. The famous line, "Stella," screamed from the bottom of a stairwell, became more than dialogue, it became an eruption of pure human need. The role made Brando a star overnight. Young men copied his leather jackets and tight t-shirts, while women swooned over his brooding intensity. But more importantly, actors themselves took notice. Brando had torn down the wall between performance and reality, showing that truth was more powerful than polish. His Stanley Kowalski wasn't just a character, he was a revolution. For Brando personally, the role gave him both glory and a curse. He became the symbol of a new masculinity, brutal yet vulnerable, magnetic yet frightening, but it also cemented an image he would spend years trying to escape. "I was just being myself," he later said, "but they made me into a myth." With A Streetcar Named Desire, Marlon Brando didn't just launch his career. He rewrote the very definition of acting. 3 years after A Streetcar Named Desire, Marlon Brando delivered a performance that would cement his place in history. As Terry Malloy in On the Waterfront, he wasn't just playing a character, he was giving voice to every working man crushed by corruption and silence. Directed by Elia Kazan, the film told the story of a dock worker who finds the courage to stand up against a corrupt union. For Brando, it was more than just another role. It was his transformation from a Hollywood rebel into a cultural hero. The heart of the film lies in one scene, whispered endlessly through time. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody, instead of a bum, which is what I am. Brando's delivery was so natural, so broken, that audiences forgot they were watching an actor. He wasn't acting, he was confessing. That single moment became one of the most iconic in film history. On the Waterfront earned Brando his first Academy Award for Best Actor, confirming what critics had already suspected. He was the most gifted actor of his generation. But the role also gave him something more respect. He was no longer just the dangerous young star of Streetcar. He was an artist capable of capturing the soul of ordinary men with extraordinary depth. Behind the scenes, though, the film carried shadows. Directed by Kazan, who had testified against colleagues during the McCarthy era, the project was controversial. Some saw it as Kazan's personal justification for betrayal. Brando himself struggled with this tension, but his performance rose above politics. It showed that even in a compromised world, truth could still be spoken. For Brando, Terry Malloy was the proof that acting could change not only his life, but the way America saw itself. And from that moment on, he was no longer just an actor, he was a symbol. By the late 1962, Marlon Brando's career was in ruins. He had a reputation for being difficult, his films were flopping, and Hollywood insiders dismissed him as a relic of the past. Then came an offer that would change everything, to play Vito Corleone in The Godfather. At first, Paramount executives resisted. Brando was considered box office poison, but Francis Ford Coppola insisted. And when Brando stuffed tissues into his cheeks, lowered his voice to a whisper, and transformed himself into the aging patriarch of a mafia dynasty, cinema witnessed resurrection. Brando's Don Corleone wasn't loud or theatrical. He was quiet, deliberate, terrifying in his stillness. With a rasping voice and piercing eyes, he made the crime boss into a tragic king, a man of power weighed down by family and betrayal. The performance was hypnotic. Viewers didn't just see a gangster, they saw a father, a ruler, a man facing the end of his reign. The gamble paid off. The Godfather became one of the most celebrated films in history, and Brando's performance earned him his second Academy Award for Best Actor. In a moment that shocked Hollywood, he refused the Oscar, sending activist Sachin Littlefeather to the ceremony in his place to protest Hollywood's portrayal of Native Americans. It was Brando at his core, brilliant, defiant, and unwilling to play by anyone's rules. The role of Vito Corleone revived Brando's career, turning him from a fading star into an immortal legend. For the next generation of actors, it became the blueprint of transformation, proof that even in silence, an actor could command the world. Brando himself summed it up best. The Godfather made me live again. If The Godfather resurrected Marlon Brando as a legend, Last Tango in Paris nearly destroyed him. Released in 1972, the same year as Coppola's masterpiece, Bernardo Bertolucci's controversial film pushed Brando into a space far darker than any role he had ever taken. He played Paul, a middle-aged American adrift in Paris after his wife's suicide, who begins a volatile and destructive affair with a young woman. Brando poured his own grief and anger into the performance. At the time, he was reeling from failed marriages, scandals, and deep personal turmoil. It was me up there, not Paul, he later confessed. The raw emotion on screen blurred the line between acting and confession. Audiences were mesmerized, critics were polarized, and the Catholic Church condemned the film outright. The infamous butter scene turned the film into one of cinema's most controversial works. Brando claimed he hadn't been told in advance how it would unfold, and for decades, the scene haunted him. It sparked outrage that followed him until his death, overshadowing the artistry of his performance. Professionally, Last Tango in Paris was a triumph. It earned Brando another Academy Award nomination and reaffirmed his unmatched intensity. Personally, it left him scarred. He later admitted the role was too personal, too close to my real life, and that filming had left him emotionally shattered. For Brando, Last Tango in Paris was both a peak and a pitfall. It showed the world an actor willing to bare his soul, but it also exposed wounds he never fully recovered from. It was the role that reminded him, and the world, that great art can come at a devastating cost. By the time Marlon Brando reached 70, his body had grown heavy and his spirit weary, but his place in history was undeniable. Few actors could claim what he had achieved, not just stardom, but transformation of an entire art form. The four roles that defined him told the story not only of his career, but of his life. Stanley Kowalski in A Streetcar Named Desire introduced a new masculinity, raw and unapologetic, while Terry Malloy in On the Waterfront gave voice to working-class struggle and secured him his first Oscar. Vito Corleone in The Godfather resurrected a fading career and turned him into a myth, while Paul, in Last Tango in Paris, blurred the line between art and personal pain, leaving a legacy of both brilliance and controversy. Each role was a mirror, reflecting not just a character but Brando himself, his rage, his tenderness, his defiance, and his demons. He didn't simply play parts, he lived them, and in doing so, he forced audiences to confront truths they might have preferred to ignore. Marlon Brando changed acting forever. He gave future generations of performers, from Al Pacino to Robert De Niro to Daniel Day-Lewis, a blueprint for authenticity. More than that, he left the world with proof that cinema could be as raw, unpredictable, and unforgettable as life itself. As Brando once said, acting is the expression of a neurotic impulse. It's a bum's life. And yet, through those roles, he turned that bum's life into timeless art.